I'm Jim Knight, co-founder of the Instructional Coaching Group, and you're listening to Coaching Conversations, where I talk with coaching experts from around the world so that all of us can learn better ways to make an unmistakably positive impact on the people around us. So good to see you.
Nice to see you too.
I'm looking forward to the conversation. So we've known each other a long time, so I wanted to start with a thank you for something you may not remember very well, but what meant a lot to me is you were instrumental in bringing learning forward back to Ontario. And I think it was London where you invited me to a presentation. And I brought my mom. And she'd never seen me present. And that's the only time she saw me present. She's passed away now. So it's really a powerful, and you were so kind and gracious to her. It made her feel, you were so hospitable to her. And it's always been one of my favorite memories to have mom there. And I think she even asked a question or had some kind of interaction at any rate. But I just want to say thanks to that. It was a really, really a great time.
I remember that well. And I remember your mom. She was a very nice lady.
Oh, she was truly, yeah, a great mom. But any rate, we've known each other a long time, more than a decade. I was trying to calculate it out, but at least a decade. We even collaborated a little bit, not enough, but we did some collaboration, particularly on instructional coaching and better conversations. And I'd love to hear your story of how you came to be, now I think you'd have to say one of, if not the world's leading expert on collective efficacy. So how did that, what's your whole story of how you came to be where you are now?
Well, in the last 20 years or so, I've been supporting high quality professional learning in schools and districts in North America. And I think collaborative inquiry is a really rich design where teams come together to identify a learning need in their students that they really want to support and problem solve on how to address those needs together. And as they develop solutions, they have a boost in efficacy because they've generated some solutions to some of their contextual problems. And that's a design that I've just found has really been very effective. And I heard John Hattie speak, and when he announced collective efficacy as the number one factor that matters most in raising student achievement, I started to think about my own experiences and how people build their efficacy together through problem solving in that design. So, and I think people also build their efficacy when they're coached, when somebody's sitting beside them and helps them to improve. And so just really thinking that through and then doing a lot of the research on what are some of the positive consequences that occur. And when I write, it's my own form of professional learning. So writing about it just really helped me to solidify my thinking.
Yeah, someone famous said that we write the books we need to read if we can't find them to read. And so maybe that's been my experience too. So I hear the word collective efficacy a lot, and I'm wondering how you define that term. What does it mean to say, what is collective efficacy, I guess?
It's first and foremost a belief. I think sometimes I worry that people think it's the newest fad or something that comes in a box or a package that's, it's a way of thinking, it's a mindset. And it's the belief that what we do together in a school, that the educators can make a difference in the lives of students over and above the educational impact of students' homes and communities, that teachers really do make a difference. And when we put forth the effort and we interpret our efforts or our success through a growth mindset, that helps to boost our efficacy. So it's important to think of it as a belief system.
So it's a group of people who collectively believe, and they have hope, but believe that they're going to make a difference in the lives of kids. And it's a shared thing. It happens individually, but collectively at the same time. Is that it?
That is correct. And it's an important belief system in schools because efficacy beliefs impact how both individuals and teams think, feel, motivate themselves, and behave.
Oh, well, that makes sense. You think of the communities or groups or teams or schools that make a difference as people who believe that what they're doing will make a difference. And I guess they believe in each other in the midst of that collectiveness as well to some extent, or at least there's a sense of together we can do more maybe.
Yeah. And what happens is it drives their efforts and helps teams become more persistent and figure out how to make evidence-based approaches work in their unique contexts. It really just helps drive the improvement because people will set higher goals and they'll work harder to achieve those goals, even when faced with challenges or setbacks.
So I want to share with you something that hopefully will make sense here. When I took statistics, to me, it was a proof that God existed because it was a miracle that I actually passed my statistics test. I would look up and I would see the professor writing the things on the chart, and I'd see them on my paper, and I'm like, how is that possible? But I did get it. I passed. So somehow I pulled it off. But I can't say I'm that statistically sharp. So for those of us who aren't great statistical people, the research I heard was that Hattie said that the effect size for collective efficacy was 1.57. And then I think that comes from Rachel L's dissertation or research that she did. So for those of us who aren't star statistics students, what does that mean and why is that such a significant number?
So the higher the effect size, the greater the magnitude of that particular influence. And when we look to statistics, if something has an effect of 0, of course, that means that it made no difference whatsoever. In Hattie's database, some of the influences actually have a negative impact on student achievement. Not many of them, but some of them do. Things like boredom or when kids have to switch schools multiple times over the course of the year, those things are actually detrimental to their achievement. So they'd have a negative effect. Those that sit in the positive realm, if something has an effect, let's say if, for example, homework has an effect size of 0.29, that means it makes some difference, but not a big difference. The larger the effect size, the greater the magnitude of that particular influence. So with collective efficacy sitting at 1.57, that means it has the potential to significantly impact student achievement in a positive way. And now that 1.57, you're correct, it was Rachel L's out of the University of Chicago's meta-analysis that put it into Hattie's database. People won't find it in his initial 2009 book because research wasn't done until 2011. But in his update from April in 2023, his synthesis includes collective efficacy. But since then, since Rachel L's dissertation, 2 more dissertations have been completed, or 2 more meta-analyses, I should say. And the new effect reported in Professor Hattie's update is 1.34. Even though it's gone down a little bit, John Hattie will say that it's not a significant decrease. It still sits at the very top of the list. It's the number 1 factor out of all of the influences in the database that matters in relation to student achievement.
And then if you compare it to the other data, and I don't know if I'm up to date with my numbers, but if I'm not mistaken, feedback is something like 0.75. Teacher clarity is in the 0.7. So giving kids feedback, being clear on what you're teaching, obviously should have a big effect. And we're saying collective efficacy is 1.35 compared to 0.7. And some researchers would say a difference of 0.15. I know Hattie talks about a 0.40, but a 0.15 difference would be a statistically significant difference. So imagine 1.34 or whatever it might be. It's an enormous difference in terms of the impact on student learning.
And when we look at the impact of socioeconomic status, that sits at about 0.54 in that area. And so collective teacher efficacy is 3 times more powerful and predictive of student achievement than the things that are not within our realm of control, like socioeconomic status.
Amazing. So we hear a lot about self-efficacy, and I'm very familiar with Megan DeShannon Moran's work because actually Bob, her partner, was my coach for a while. My running coach, yeah. And Megan's a wonderful human being, but she talks about self-efficacy and she talked about collective efficacy. But what's the difference between self-efficacy and collective efficacy, and do those 2 concepts connect at all?
So self-efficacy, and this extends beyond education, of course, because we can be efficacious in all kinds of realms. But self-efficacy is the belief that somebody has in their capability to achieve an intended outcome or goal.
Mhm.
In teaching, that would be a teacher efficacy. Self-teacher efficacy would be a teacher's belief in his or her ability to meet student learning needs. Um, and then that does extend to the collective. And as we said at the very beginning, I like the way you kind of drew the attention to the idea that it's a shared belief that
Mhm.
together the work we do matters and that we can together contribute to meeting the needs of students in our schools.
Well, I was thinking, and maybe I'm wrong about this because you would know better than me, but I was thinking, or better not, anyway, you would know better. I was thinking it would be hard to have collective efficacy without self efficacy. Is that fair to say? Like, if
Yeah,
I don't believe I can do it, then I'm probably not going to believe the group can do it.
yeah, there is research that demonstrates there's a relationship between the two concepts, and it is reciprocal. The idea that, I need to have self-efficacy, and then I'm more likely to be efficacious with my team members. But it is also possible for some members of the team to have that collective efficacy. Maybe we have somebody who's a beginning teacher. Imagine somebody who's just starting out, maybe in their first couple of years, they might not have a strong sense of efficacy, but by joining a team where efficacy is enhanced, then we're likely to help those teachers gain a sense of efficacy on their
Right.
own.
When I first started to study this, like you, I was really interested in Michael Fullan. I took some of his courses at University of Toronto. He introduced me to Susan Rosenholz, and her research talked about what are the characteristics of schools where she called them moving schools versus stuck schools. And her big thing was if you took a teacher from a stuck school and put that teacher into a moving school, a place where there is probably collective efficacy, that teacher is going to get better. But if you do the opposite, you take a teacher from a school that's a moving school, put them in a stuck school, they're going to have to fight to succeed. If they win an award, everybody will make fun of them for being successful. So they have to fight to be good. So that resonates with me as being really effective. So, what are one or two stories about the power of collective efficacy?
I think of a team in a high school in Ontario, Canada, and they were working really hard together to figure out how to. And I maybe this isn't the best story because it deals with standardized test scores, but it is a measure that's on people's radar. So in Ontario, we have standardized tests, literacy test in grade 10. And in this particular high school, there was a group of students who had not passed it their first time around, and then also a group of students that needed additional support to be able to, meet with success when they were taking it for the first time. And so this team really worked hard to prepare students to help them with the literacy that would give them the skills to succeed on the test. They waited until that test came out and the results, and they could see that they made incredible gains with both groups, first time eligible and those students who needed support with a second attempt. The results were extraordinary, like really high percentage of success that they had not seen before. What's key is that they knew it was their efforts that helped make the difference. And so they built their efficacy through seeing their success happen. And of course, student efficacy comes into play as well. Students then would feel more efficacious, and student efficacy actually has an effect size of 0.71. So it matters as well. As teachers are building their own efficacy and as students are succeeding, I think all of these things come into play together. Like not one thing happens in education that we could really attribute, gains to. They kind of work in tandem.
Well, your stories are making me think that I'm convinced that the vast majority, and Michael Fullan actually had a study to support he cites a study to support this, that the vast majority of people become teachers to make a difference. Mm-hmm. And so if they're in a setting where the prevailing belief is we can make a difference, we can do this, we have hope, that's going to be a heck of a lot more fun to work there, or at least more meaningful to work there than it is to work in a setting where there is no hope or where there isn't that collective efficacy. So it must be, look at right now, the crisis in retaining new teachers. It must be really powerful to have a setting where people feel they're supported and they're a part of something, doing something good.
Absolutely. You're just making me think of another situation in which efficacy was really lacking. I sat in with a group of teachers in a professional learning community, and one guy stood up and said, "There's nothing left we can do for these students. We've done everything that we could possibly try." And I really reflected for a long time on that, because I thought, how does this person have any satisfaction coming to work? Like, what
Mm,
a sad place to be in feeling that way. And then if you feel that way, you're going to give up.
right.
You're not going to try. And so, yeah,
Mm.
really important consequences that come from those different belief systems.
Well, you mentioned growth mindset versus fixed mindset. It sounds like he's really got a fixed mindset.
Yeah.
How you break out of that is this reminds me of, this is like one of my favorite concepts. So if there's people who've heard me talk before, I've probably heard this, but it reminds me of the hope theory, that hope involves a goal, pathways to the goal, and a belief the goal will take you there. And so when you have someone who's given up hope, I guess if they could see a pathway, or they and increasing evidence that they're actually making a difference, then maybe there's hope for hope with that person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you have a book, Quality Implementation, and in the book you talk about how collective efficacy can be a powerful force for high impact improvements in schools. Your subtitle is "To Make What Works Actually Work." So I know this is a tough question to summarize one book in like 2 minutes or so, but can you give us kind of a quick summary of what that book's all about, and how collective efficacy and high quality implementation interrelate, and all the things that are in the book?
Sure. So my co-author, Stephen Katz, helped write that book. And
Right.
when we collaborated, that's what we came down to, this idea that it really, collective efficacy helps to support quality implementation. We don't need any more research around what works in education. There's a wealth of research that points to a lot of promising approaches, but just because it worked somewhere for someone doesn't take into account the context. So we say that context really matters.
Mm-hmm.
And quality implementation really is the process of a group of people coming together, trying to implement some evidence-based approaches into their practice, reflecting on what worked well and what didn't, and why in their respective contexts, and then making the necessary adjustments. So that really is that process of quality implementation. And what we describe in the book is how collective efficacy can really result in a group of people going through that process together and meeting with success. That efficacy really helps people figure out how to make those evidence-based approaches work in their respective contexts.
I wonder if it's like a virtuous circle, like when you have collective efficacy, you start to see success and you gather data, but the data you're gathering that shows success reinforces the collective efficacy. Or when you see success, it's easier to buy in, if it's that kind of virtuous cycle.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm trying to remember a phrase that I read from Albert Bandura, who, of course, is the person who coined the term and done many decades of studies. He said that collective efficacy is a renewable resource, that it doesn't get depleted by its use, but it actually gets renewed through its use. And he does describe it as reciprocal, that the more efficacious we are, the higher the goals we'll set. We'll work harder toward achieving those goals. And then as we achieve them, that success and efficacy relationship is really cyclical, just like you described it.
Yeah, and then the idea is there's no ceiling on what's best for kids. We can always do more. We can always, not to say people aren't always doing great things. You can build on their strength, but it can make a difference. If you were a principal leading a school, what would be some of the things you would do to foster collective efficacy?
Yeah, one of the things that I think is important for people to understand is the sources that influence efficacy judgments. And this is the work of Albert Bandura again. He identified 4 sources, and I'll describe each one of those. And I'm hoping that as I'm describing them, people are thinking about what are the implications for my work. Like if I'm a principal, if I'm a coach, if this is how teams and teachers, individual teachers, form their efficacy judgments, what can I do to tap into these sources? So Bandura will say that efficacy beliefs are future-oriented beliefs that are based on our past experiences. And we draw upon mastery as the number one source. So when we have met with success, like that team in Ontario that I described, when they've set a goal and they've achieved that goal, when they interpret their success through a growth mindset, their efficacy is enhanced. And one other thing that's important to understand about mastery as a source of efficacy is teams need to succeed at the things that they perceive as challenging. If they achieve at only easy tasks, that does nothing to boost their efficacy. So I think for a school administrator or a coach, the implications of that first source is that how can we make sure that people are placed in situations that are challenging, not too difficult, but how do we support them in setting some challenging goals, and then helping them make the link between their efforts and resulting outcomes.
So
a lot of psychology in there.
No, oh, that's good. I don't think I need to go back and read Bandura and remember this. So if I'm a principal and I have that teacher who's given up hope, what are your thoughts about how to work with that teacher?
Well, I think when we think of mastery, setting them up so that they can have some of those mastery experiences. And then I think not only that, but when we think of feedback that a principal might give to a teacher, one of the things that I think becomes important is helping them make the link between the things that they did and the resulting outcomes. So the feedback is really around the role of the efforts that the team put forth, and making sure that they see that those efforts resulted in positive outcomes.
So that gets back to how we would see hope. And we say coaches foster hope by coaches helping people find pathways to a goal, helping them identify a goal they really care about through data, and then building agency, a belief that the pathway will take them there. And if you put those things in place where the person sets a goal and sees progress, and what Zaretta Hammond or Teresa Amabile would call the progress principle, then you've got a chance to move forward. So there's hope even for the hopeless. Now, what about a coach? Is there anything different you'd say about a coach when a coach is supporting for better, like say fostering collective efficacy? What could coaches do to foster collective efficacy?
Well, I want to come back to Bandura's sources. And I think that the second source speaks to coaches, and that's that people build their efficacy vicariously when they see someone else meet with success. Then they build their efficacy by seeing somebody. But the caveat here is that whoever they're observing, they need to see them as like me somehow.
Right.
It's easy to dismiss someone else's success if that classroom looks nothing like my own classroom, or if the students don't look like my students, or if I don't have access to those same resources. So when I shared that once, I had a coach come up to me and say, that was really helpful to me because that gives me a frame in which to start a coaching conversation. It gives me some ideas around pre-observation, during, and post-observation if I'm going to bring someone in to observe another teacher. It gives me some language to help nudge so that the person that I'm coaching will see some similarity between what's going on in other classrooms and what could go on in his or her classroom. And so those vicarious experiences become a good opportunity to build efficacy. The coach also, when I think of persuasion, that's the third source, is when people are persuaded by a credible and trustworthy other to go out on a limb and take a risk. And I think coaches do a lot of that persuasion too in their coaching work.
But what I'm hearing is telling people it's going to work isn't that persuasive. What persuades people is either an experience where they do it themselves. Well, I tried that strategy and all my kids were engaged. Or they experience it, or if they can't experience it themselves, they have a vicarious experience, someone else that they respect. That's why once I was presenting with my friend Don Deschler, who is my mentor and my dissertation advisor, and just a really wonderful human being. Don was chosen by the Council for Exceptional Children as one of the 10 most influential people in special ed in the 20th century because of his research on learning disabilities. And we were presenting in a school, Don was presenting. I was there just as a graduate student. The teachers are kind of listening. And here's, one of the 10 most renowned experts in the world on this topic. And then one of the teachers said, well, when I did it, this is and everybody just totally locked onto the teacher and listened to what she had to say because they could see herself in them. People aren't persuaded by talk, but that vicarious experience. I think that's a brilliant insight.
And then the fourth source that Bandura identifies, I think, has implications for coaching and for principals as well, is that our feelings and emotions come into play when we're forming efficacy judgments. And if we feel anxiety, stress, or nervousness or fear, those negative emotions actually diminish our efficacy, but positive emotions help to boost it. And so I think there's implications there for the listeners as well, as how do we make sure that people feel good about the things that they're doing and recognize those emotions, those positive emotions, and help to keep the negative ones, help to diminish those negative emotions in schools.
Right. Right. And I suppose part of that is just matching them. If they're in a point where they want to have a feelings conversation, they probably don't want to if they're wanting to express their emotion, they probably don't want to problem solve right now. They want to have a chance just to let it go. Yeah.
Right. I was just reading a book by, last name's Voss. I can't remember the first name, but he's a hostage negotiator.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was really interesting. He talks about in his situation, you can imagine the emotions come into play in a big way. And one of the things that he notes that I think has implications for efficacy as well, or feelings in schools, is he said that labeling is an effective strategy for addressing emotions. And if you label a negative emotion, it actually helps to diminish it. And if you label a positive emotion, it helps to amplify it.
Huh. So if someone's frustrated and you say, it sounds like you're really frustrated by this challenge, that's actually going to diminish it.
Absolutely. And you framed it perfectly, because he goes on to say that those statements of labeling are more effective when you use "it sounds like," or "it feels like," or "it seems like," because then you let the person know that you're understanding their perspective. If you make it an "I" statement, I think you're really upset, then you're making it more about you. But by phrasing it in that more neutral language, it causes the person to reflect on what they're feeling. I had a principal that used that strategy. I work in Oklahoma with a group called Moving Up. Lisa Pryor, of course, and Carrie White. So I was sharing that strategy with our Moving Up cohort of early year principals. And the next time I saw them, I said, did anyone try that, labeling that negative emotion? And one principal said, well, yeah, just last week, I had a teacher come into my office and she was really upset. And I said, it seems like you're really upset. And she said the person sat down in her chair, paused and reflected and said, well, actually, no, it's just that I'm more sad than anything. And so it was an effective way. By labeling it, she said it caused a person to start to calm and to really just recognize and really more accurately label her own emotion.
That's so helpful, because if the principal had said, I can tell you're upset, then the conversation wouldn't have gone anywhere. Yeah.
I think so.
So given that you've written so much, I know we can't cover it in 35 minutes or 45 minutes, but what else would you like to mention? Maybe you'd like to say a little bit about the new book or anything else you'd like to share that we haven't had a chance to touch on.
Sure. And I wish that my co-author, Glenn Forbes, was here with me. I didn't know the topic would come up, or I would have invited him. Plus, he's on a totally different time zone. He's in Australia. And so it's the middle of the night for him right now. But he's been instrumental in the ideas in this new book. And it's called, well, we don't have a title yet. It won't be out until February, but the concept is the enemies of efficacy, identifying some of the things that get in the way, and then really pinpointing how to overcome those enemies. And so there's a lot of actionable steps for school leaders and system leaders to take to help overcome some of these enemies. That move of labeling emotions is one example. That's an example in the book. And there's a lot of others. And so I'm excited about that. And we've spent the last year really working on the manuscript.
Why isn't the enemies of efficacy the title? That sounds like a great title.
It might be. I think that what we'd like it to be called is collective impact and then the subtitle, Overcoming the Enemies of Efficacy. So that's and we've got 12 enemies and then really practical strategies.
Mm.
And what I think I love about the book too are the strategies, whether you're a school leader that's working to build efficacy or just really trying to build a positive culture, that it will resonate with people.
Well, people will read it and they go, oh, yeah, I've got that. How do I deal with that situation? That's going to be great.
Thank you.
I'm excited to see it. Well, you're going to be at TLC this year. In fact, TLC is going to be in your hometown. So do you know now what you want to present at TLC, or are you still putting it together? What are your thoughts about what you're going to do?
I think I'm going to talk about three enemies of efficacy with the audience and work them through. And of course, it won't be a sit and get. I like to make sure that
Right.
my sessions are very interactive, but I'm going to probably offer three enemies of efficacy to the audience and help them work through how to overcome those.
Oh, I love it. Hopefully I can be there. I'm usually not able to do stuff, but I hope I can be there. Okay, you're our resident expert on collective efficacy, but you're also our expert on New Orleans. So when we come to New Orleans, aside from going to see Taylor Swift right before the conference, what are some of the things we absolutely have to do when we come to New Orleans? What's your tips for traveling to the Big Easy?
Awesome. So I would suggest scoping out restaurants in advance and making a reservation. That would be important if you want to get into one of your favorite restaurants. There's so much to do in this city. There's Frenchman Street. If you're into some really good live jazz, you want to visit Frenchman Street. There's plantations not far away, and you can go on a plantation tour if you have some time. They're well worth it. Really interesting history. There's lots of opportunities too to explore the French Quarter and some fun tours that are very. Any tour we've been on, we found that the tour guide's been very, what's the word I'm looking for? Very well educated in the
Mm-hmm.
history. So if you want to know a little bit more and have some fun, you could go on a ghost tour. One last thing I would say is if you're interested, the World War II Museum is as a highlight here as well.
Very cool. We will be just off the edge of the French Quarter. So
Right.
that's like our backyard for the conference.
It's an excellent location.
Well, we're excited, and I'm grateful for everything you're doing, and very grateful for the conversation. Thanks so much, Jenni.
Thank you.
We'll see you in New Orleans.
Okay.